Thanks for participating. I'm going to now give control of the keyboard to Lauren, as well as to unmute Lauren so that we can enjoy her presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining from all over, it sounds like. I am going to go through a quick overview of who Blue Haven is, just so everybody gets a sense of where we're coming from and what we do. And then we'll run through what is relatively, I wouldn't say it's necessarily targeted towards the off-grid sector, but this is the way we invest in the off-grid sector. So please do feel free during the question and answer section to make me get more specific if there's things that people are, really focused on learning. So that was the agenda, which I already sort of went through. Just the brief overview on Blue Haven. We are a family office based in the U.S., and my team manages the direct investment portfolio for the family. But the family that's behind the family office, Liesl Pritzker-Simmons and her husband Ian, decided a while back that they wanted to make, to put all of their assets into investments that are aligned with their values. And so everything has a social or environmental good across asset classes. So that means not just the portfolio that I manage, but our real estate holdings, our private equity, everything across the board is invested this way, but also very much for profit. I always feel a need to remind people that we're not a foundation. This is the money that the family lives off of and intends to pass down to the next generation. So we're very focused on making commercial rates of return just as much as we are doing some good in the world, and that's the lens we bring to our direct portfolio as well. Just a background on our venture portfolio, which my team manages. We have made since I started about 2.5 years ago, we've made 5, soon 7 investments by the end of this quarter. We're focused on sub-Saharan Africa and really started mostly focused on renewable energy and financial services. With, as you can see, a number of our portfolio companies are sort of energy and financial services. We consider MCOPA more financial services than energy, but we've also recently made moves into investing in companies that support our businesses. So as I'm sure all of the early stage and growth stage and everyone on the phone knows in these markets, human resource management, everything from sourcing and screening and professional development is a huge problem. So we've also started making investments in that space. Including into Spire, which does professional development for a number of energy companies, actually. I think a number of you on the phone are actually Spire clients. But we usually start investing at Series A, which means wildly different things to every person on the continent, I would say. But we like to start investing $500,000 to $1 million to start. We love co-investors. We don't like doing things alone. So for the investors on the phone, always interested in chatting. But this is sort of what we do. I think the most of our portfolio companies in the energy sector will be familiar. Cross-boundary energy is the only one that might not be, which is they do solar financing for businesses across the continent. So this is, again, this is going to be a relatively sort of generic venture capital investing 101, but please, force me to get more detailed in the questions section. I'm happy to answer anything. But one of the reasons that investors, when we too have been attracted to the pay-as-you-go sector, is because the rapid decline in the price of solar, as you all know, and the need for last-mile distribution solutions and the desire by many of all of our company's customers to have larger systems that they might not necessarily be able to afford in one lump sum payment. This brings the ability to serve these pretty hard to serve customers to market in a way that we think is really scalable. A lot of the companies, depending on how you're set up, but certainly the companies we're invested in, the key for them is last mile, the way they execute the last mile distribution problem. So though MCOPA does sort of design its own systems, the value in that company is how they execute their distribution network and their ability to do that profitably, or hopefully profitably someday, as I know is a big ongoing discussion in the industry around profitability. But starting in East Africa, I think a lot of these companies were able to use the backbone that mobile money had created, and as you all know, that has really opened up a lot of possibilities for low-income customers to pay for larger ticket items in small increments on a daily basis. And for M-KOPA, that the ability to provide other kinds of financing opportunities. So I think everybody knows M-KOPA doesn't just do the sort of base solar home system. Now they're in TVs, but they also will refinance your basic system as a customer for things like a bicycle or a smartphone or a cook stove. So they use that the desire, and once someone is used to having light and phone charging and radio and maybe even TV in their home, they use that as an asset that can be refinanced over time for other stuff, while displacing existing spending. And I think at least a lot of the early stage investors in this market were also very focused on the ability to scale a highly both environmental and socially impactful company, distribution network to lower income people that have been served by existing power grids, existing banking systems, and everything else. So that's that's why we're in the space, and I think that's what's attracted a lot of impact investors to the space, and now increasingly a number of more commercial growth stage VCs, depending on the company. So this is, I'm going to go through each of these stages, but sort of focus on the left-hand side a bit more. As those of you in the seed stage know very, very well, it's really hard to raise money in these markets upfront, and so in seed stage you can raise money from any number of places. One thing that's different than those coming from the developed world is that grants are often sort of seed stage funders, so folks like Shell Foundation, USAID, other development finance institutions with grant programs that are really targeting for-profit businesses that are meant to scale, help scale companies at the stage where they're just the funding ecosystem is really undeveloped, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. I think that region is a lot further behind, certainly India and many parts of Latin America, and so that the grants tend to take the vast majority of the opportunity at that stage, which often is a little bit difficult to explain, particularly when you're talking to later stage, more commercial mainstream venture funders. They sort of say, why did you take grants? Why isn't there a seed stage fund? And it's like, well, there really isn't any. And then hopefully some of those early stage funders get your companies to break even. But let's dig into each of these sort of sections. And I think most of you are probably, certainly at the early stage, looking for sort of equity that, it's very difficult to finance an early stage business with debt that has real teeth like debt. We can have the conversation of whether or not convertible debt is actually debt or if it's equity. If you're an equity investor and you're putting the first check into a company, even if it's got some downside protection as convertible debt does, the reality is if the company doesn't do well, your convertible debt is not going to be worth much. So we sort of think of both of those as equity. And then for the more mature companies, and this is really where Sunfunder has built an incredible expertise, and Shelmith will talk about later on the debt side from both securitization, using inventory and receivables, but we'll focus on these equity sections for now. So, for those of you that are just getting started, it sounds like a number of you are in the seed stage. I think the due diligence process for a lot of investors, first of all, it can vary wildly. And so just to give you a sense of at least what we do, we go through kind of this three-stage process. And, I would encourage all of the entrepreneurs on the phone, and this is a theme I'll come back to a fair bit. When you're raising money, it's a big deal, whoever you let invest in your company, and you should really treat it as you choosing them just as much as they're they're choosing you. You know, one of the number one things I like to find in entrepreneurs is people that, you know, we can constructively disagree with. You're never going to always agree with your board or your investors, and they're not always going to agree with you. But, you know, I will hope for entrepreneurs who want to have discussions about, you know, why they're doing something, and, you know, get to the best conclusion because there are lots of smart people around the table. It's not, and you know, admitting that that's something you're open to in the due diligence process, I think is really important because, you know, things are always great when everyone's writing checks and putting money in, but there will always be bumps in the road. If I've learned anything working in this market for about a decade, nothing ever goes as you think it will. And so really finding folks that you can tell bad news and have discussions with is really important. But to get back to sort of the actual, what do we do in due diligence? First, you know, we usually start with a phone call and a deck. So, you know, it's really annoying. You have to write a deck that's like a bunch of probably half made up stuff, and you have to act like you know what you're doing in every aspect of a business that might even still be on paper. But you got to do it. And so, you know, we do a phone call. Often we'll get some preliminary numbers, try and talk through with an entrepreneur, you know, why are you doing this? Because it is going to get hard. And so, you know, understanding why an entrepreneur and a team are passionate about a problem that is really hard to solve is important for us. Again, coming back to the fact that it's, you know, never going to be super easy to do any of this. And then when we decide that, you know, something is more interesting, we'll do a bunch of mostly desk research. And so important to mention, a lot of the investors, I am technically based in the US, though I spend about half my time in Nairobi. There are, you know, you do have to sometimes manage a lot of international investors, some who know the markets better than others. And so a lot of this gets done by phone, but we really try, and I would encourage you as entrepreneurs not to have people come visit and spend time with you and your team and distract you from running the business until, you know, you have a really good feeling that A, you want to work with these people, and that B, they have money, which is something that I'm always shocked by how many sort of pseudo investors pretend like their fund is closed or say they're going to have money from someone, go out and do due diligence, and then when it comes time to properly sign a term sheet, they sort of say, well, our fund's not closed, or, you know, we've got to circle up investors or something like that. So I would really do your homework on that early, because there's nothing that is more soul crushing than spending a bunch of time getting excited about a group and then realizing they actually don't have any money, which it happens a lot more than you'd think. But in that desk research phase, we really try and figure out, you know, okay, here's the top 5 reasons we're excited about this business, and do some digging on as much as we can if those reasons, you know, what are the facts that back up that those reasons. And we do, you know, phone calls with others in market, and try and figure out as much as we can the concrete reasons why we're excited about this, and then be really honest about the risks. Like, you know, early stage investing, return doesn't come without risk, and, you know, we hope that the significant risk we've taken on some of these companies at very early stages will translate into return, but you know, nothing is riskless, and so we have to figure out what risks we're willing to take on, what mitigants sort of exist, and what we're just willing to live with as investors. The other thing, and this is a little bit more straightforward in this industry than some of the other industries we look at, but the revenue model. What is your business model? How do you make money? Make sure that that's super clear up front. You'd be shocked how many times I can get through an entire, you know, hour-long meeting with an entrepreneur, and then when they finally pick their heads up and for questions, and you just say, like, wait, how exactly do you make money? And then there's some long, convoluted explanation. Don't do that. You know, it is something that all investors are going to be super focused on. And then, you know, once we decide to come do a visit, you know, basically we are kicking the tires to stress test your financial model, and the financial model really amounts to a business plan. I'll talk a little bit about, like, what kinds of materials you need at each stage of fundraising, Most of the companies in which we invest don't have business plans. I think they're a waste of time, but there are some investors out there that, just like having all of the information in one place. I think it makes their process easier. Certainly it cuts down on the amount we have to write ourselves in our investment memos, but it's not a prerequisite. We look at your capitalization, how much, who owns what. If you're a seed stage entrepreneur, you should probably still own the vast majority of your company, and that's something we want to see, the entrepreneurs owning a big, certainly a majority, at least through a Series A, probably a Series B, depending on the circumstance. Everyone's always asks for rules of thumb of like, okay, at a Series A, how much should the founders own? How much should the ESOP be? I've learned that every deal has its own quirks and nuance for what happened early and a founder that left and all these things. So there aren't great rules of thumb, but we do want to see you owning the majority of the company if possible through a Series B. Then we do lots of legal due diligence. We read your contracts. We read any other fundraising docs you have. If you've got debt from someone, what are the terms? And then we have an internal process where we're talking to our own investment committee. And that's a group of people that basically decide if what my team has presented is a good idea. And so, that process, I have to touch base with them. There's things that they ask that, sometimes can be sometimes off the wall, but we have to gather information and sort of help them understand why we think this is a good idea, and then we all decide together ultimately if we're gonna do something. But that's an iterative process and sort of goes on throughout these 3 phases. So at seed stage, which I think I heard 26% of you are at this stage, these rounds can look pretty. There's no great rules of thumb. Sources of funding can be vastly different depending on the company. You'll hear people refer to friends, family, and fools. At this stage, often there's just an idea on paper. Hopefully you've got some experience that makes you relevant to whatever market you're trying to attack. And, often businesses are pre-revenue. People are looking for funding to make prototypes, do research and development, start piloting a product and figuring out product market fit. But this is certainly the riskiest stage, and if you recall, is the toughest in that sort of startup funding life cycle to get funded.
And that's actually the biggest. It's about 40% of the people on the webinar are at this stage.
And I'll stay here a bit longer. But materials-wise, like I said, it's hard to avoid needing a deck or some kind of executive summary. If you feel like writing a business plan is good for you, then do it. But I wouldn't say that that's something I would spend a ton of time on. You should have a strategic plan of, once we figure out what product market fit is, here's how we roll out the next phase, and all of that is going to change. One thing we've realized, particularly at the financial model at this stage, it's all made up, and we know that as investors. We are going to try and hold you to budgets and projections as much as we can. But when people miss projections, the first year we're invested. I mean, even at Series A, we've done a few seed deals, but even at Series A, it's just a matter of like, okay, well, what do we learn, and how is that going to make us better for the next year, the next quarter, the next 5 years? And that is something I would say is one of the key factors for us, particularly certainly when we've looked at seed stage, and we work with a lot of other seed stage funders. In energy, we work closely with the Shell Foundation, who makes very early stage grants to energy companies. I would encourage you all to apply with them if you haven't already, depending on the market you're in. But here the number one thing is we're looking at teams and making sure that they have the perseverance, and you'll often hear the word grit from investors, because I will keep saying this so none of you, when things go badly, you won't think that everyone else has it together. Things always go wrong. They never go how you think they are. These markets are entirely unpredictable. But the folks that are going to make it are the ones that they pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and sort of get going and use whatever happened as a learning to make the business better over time. You know, if you're new to the industry, I'm sure MCOPA seems like they've got it all figured out. I think every year since we first invested in them, well, in previous roles for me in 2012, every year they've blown a big piece of the business up and totally started over. And that's really scary. And so I've always said that I think they have done so well because they've had the courage to do that more than they've always had the right answer. And so I would say at this stage, you know, that's probably that quality, which is really hard to find, it's very subjective, right? Understanding how an entrepreneur learns, how they deal with setbacks, that's what makes a difference at this stage. Hopefully you've got the stomach for it. I think I have like a few more minutes, so I will try and get through all this. But
a couple more minutes, but we'll go a little bit over time. But
okay.
We want to get to Q&A quite soon.
Cool. So I've talked a lot about this. I won't spend much time here, but you know, accelerators are one area that can be interesting. I would do your homework, talk to folks that have been through the accelerator, make sure it's worth it. I think, you know, if there's not money, I would maybe not bother, and don't do 20 accelerators. You know, we meet a lot of businesses that are in 10 different programs, and it's like, well, while you're sitting in class, who's actually out there building the business? And so, you know, that's an area that's become quite popular. Grants, concessionary sources, DFIs are increasingly trying to do seed stage. I still think their processes take way too long for companies that are trying to move fast at this stage, but you know, there's a number of sources that are cropping up there. Africa Boost with some of the European DFIs comes to mind. And I think you're always better off with someone who knows the geography in which you're working. The number of times, you know, MCOPA's got Generation Investment Management. It was their first investment in Africa, and they did a ton of homework on the space and the region before they came, but they are still shocked by things like, well, you know, rainy season really cut down on sales this month, and they were like, but it was just raining. Why isn't everyone selling anything? And then a couple board meetings ago, they were actually caught in a rainstorm on the way to the airport. It took them 6 hours to get to the airport in Nairobi, and I think they finally understood why that might cut down on sales. So just things like that are really hard to explain to people that haven't spent a lot of time in the country you're working in. You know, always good to have people that are willing to show up and be in the trenches with you. So that's the only thing I'll say there. We talked a little bit about this, so I won't spend much time here, but you know, lots of grants available. Just really be careful that you aren't changing your business model in order to qualify for a grant, because that's not a long-term solution. And don't build something where, you know, you're never going to reach break even because you're used to having free money. You know, those are the two kind of biggest pitfalls we see with companies that are really good at getting grants, but then they become not so good at building a sustainable business. Venture, it doesn't sound like too many of you are at this stage, and you're probably equally as well versed in it if you are. You know, the difference here is that you've got to have proven, you know, to a certain extent product market fit. You've got to have revenue traction. You know, this is an area that's a little bit more well-trod as far as there being, you know, more fund managers like us at Blue Haven, you know, and there are other family offices that play in this space. The family offices are sort of tough to track down usually. Similar materials, but, you know, things have to be a little bit more in shape. We can talk, I think I have a slide on impact metrics, but I'll leave this here. And if anyone wants to know anything about this, please do ask a question. Term sheets, super boring, legal jargon, lots of times, and happy to go into any details on this, but these are the key sort of components of a term sheet. Entrepreneurs and investors are both always like, what's the valuation? What do they think I'm worth? The reality is that the valuation is important, but you are also setting yourself up to have to far exceed that valuation in the next round. So make sure you're really sure you can do that. You know, we've definitely encountered entrepreneurs, particularly those based in the US, who get super focused on this number, and the bigger the better. And the reality is you're going to make your life a lot harder later if you can't hit the numbers that back that particular valuation up. And then a lot of these other rights and liquidation preferences is a really big one, make a much bigger difference down the line with how things go, how you get paid as a common shareholder in management. So don't not pay attention to all this stuff. Have a good legal team. I know they're expensive, but it really matters. And we've worked with the same team of lawyers. I've worked with the same team of lawyers for almost 8 years, and we've gotten to a good place. But I've learned that often I want to be softer on entrepreneurs because I want to get a deal done. I want them to like me up front. We all have that. And then inevitably, a year or two down the line, something will come up, and our lawyers are like, well, we told you to keep that clause in. And, scenarios that you never thought would happen always happen. And so, make sure you're really being thorough about what you're signing with your legal documents and term sheets. I've talked enough about MCOPA. This is sort of an evolution of who's funded them and when, but suffice it to say they went from grants to impact investors, and now they've obviously got, a very commercial growth stage venture partner, similar with debt. They've sort of run the gamut across those sources of capital. Oh, this was a section that I sort of went over up front, but please make sure you're excited about your investors and you feel like they're folks you can work with for a really long time. Finding people that can invest on an ongoing basis is always the best case scenario, but not always available in these markets. Most funds are small and relegated to a couple of rounds. We're one of the few that can really stick with a company over time. And it's something, we've been set up that way specifically because we know it's rare. But, understanding what their motivations are, who their investors are, is always really important up front because, like you, I have to satisfy the investors that gave me money at the family office. And so sometimes those motivations are different than what they might sort of tell you up front or on a visit. All of these things we've gone over, but really being able to share conflicts, bumps in the road, everything else, super important, and finding people that you can do that with is key. All right, got through it.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. I'm going to launch one more poll on the equity side about your experiences raising money, and then we'll open for a few questions for Lauren. So first, here's the poll. So in your experience, what has been the most challenging part about raising or trying to raise early stage financing? And this will be good feedback too for our associate members who are working with early stage companies. Okay, give a few more seconds to vote. All right. So from this group, it seems that the biggest challenge has been finding investors that have the right type of funding for me, which is pretty aligned with what we hear also from the field. Finding investors who have ticket sizes that are appropriate, that have the type of funding that companies need is typically harder. And the second hardest thing is convincing investors that my enterprise is worth investing. And then smaller groups say that getting face time with investors or providing due diligence documents is difficult. So really it seems that the major hurdle is still matching investors and the enterprises who are looking for funding. And Lauren, how do you respond to that? Do you think that there is any solution to this, or is it always going to be the case that investors are looking for either larger or otherwise different types of investments compared to the companies?
Yeah, I mean, this is always the the perennial, you get a room of investors and you ask them, what's the biggest problem to them doing more deals, and they'll say qualified entrepreneurs, and you get entrepreneurs in a room and they say, what's your biggest problem? And they say there's not enough investors. And it is, I mean, frankly, it is like dating, you finding someone that you really like and want to work with happens rarely. And, for color, we probably see 400, 500 deals a year. And that's everything from someone sending me an email and us just being like, oh, that's not a fit from an industry perspective or a stage perspective. We do max 4 deals a year. So that's 1%. So it is, and sometimes I can fully admit, I like to think we're super scientific about who moves from just an email to a phone call and who moves from a phone call to due diligence, but it can be, anything from the way that the entrepreneur worded an email and it made me think like, oh, it sounds like they really know what they're doing. Or, encouragement from someone that I trust in my network who says, this person's really good. Talk to them. So, I don't have any great answers for how to fix that. Besides, the best entrepreneurs that I've talked to have really done their homework. They understand their competitive landscape. They understand the challenges. They know that they're going to have to work hard through those. The worst is when I mentioned we're investors in MCOPA and people haven't heard of the company. That's happened before. And so just know what you're trying to do, and that comes through often.
And we have a few questions here from the audience, so I'll combine one of them. One is asking whether Blue Haven Initiative provides technical assistance, and the other one is, would Blue Haven Initiative invest in other companies than MCOPA in the solar home space?
Yeah, both good questions. So I guess it depends on your definition of technical assistance. We have co-invested with lots of people that provide technical assistance. I gotta say, I've never been super impressed. And what we do, I mean, we're a sort of 3-ish person team. And we do everything from helping build financial models for companies that don't yet have CFOs to we're running like a sales training, an enterprise sales training for our businesses that are selling to other businesses in Nairobi. So we don't have like a formal technical assistance program, but we keep our eyes out for interventions that we think can help, particularly if it will work across some of our portfolio companies. So we saw a problem where everybody was selling to enterprises, which is a specific skill set. Most of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio didn't have that skill set. And so we're bringing in an expert to sort of teach them the science of sales training. So we do things like that, but we don't have like a consultant on call that we like send in to do a big report, which I think is is very infrequently useful. On investing in competitors, so we will not invest in companies that are directly competing with our existing portfolio companies. So in East Africa, if you're operating a solar home system with similar sort of options as MCOPA, we're probably not going to be a great investor, and you shouldn't want us as an investor, frankly. And in West Africa, we've really backed PEG for some of the smaller markets. We've talked to folks in Nigeria, it depends, but it would be tough for us to do another solar home company or someone who is manufacturing solar homes. So that's, why we've gone into the construction and industrial financing space with cross boundary, and we've looked a ton at mini grids and that sort of thing. So we're more likely to play in different parts of the value chain than do another solar home system company.
Great, thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks for the presentation and for the answers to the questions. We are going to then move to Shelmith on the debt side. I'm going to launch another poll to see a little bit where we are on the debt financing scale. From our answers to the equity side, it looks like most likely we won't have a lot of people who have raised debt financing yet, but let's see. All right. So about half of the group is planning to raise debt in the next 1 to 2 years. And about a third of the participants have raised money so far from international investors and 9% from local financial institutions. And then we have about 18%, so a fifth of the participants who don't plan to raise debt in the near future. So it seems, Shalmith, that about half of the group, or more than half of the group actually, are potential clients for SunFunder. It'll be really interesting to get your perspective. Shalmith, you have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you, and then I'll move the slides for you as you ask.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. And, my name is Shelby, like you said, and I'm an investment officer with SunFunder. I'm going to tell you about what to look for when assessing a loan, and with a particular focus on financing needs of early-stage smaller solar companies. A brief overview of SunFunder: we provide debt financing for off-grid solar companies and projects. We are based in the US and also East Africa. I joined SunFunder about a year ago, having come from a banking sector in Kenya, where I was involved in financing SMEs. Within SunFunder, we've unlocked over $40 million from investors, mainly in US and Europe, and we've used it to provide inventory, working capital, and project finance to more than 30 solar companies in the sector. These facilities range from $100,000 to about $3 million. And we are working in 12 countries so far, in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Through that debt financing, we've been able to provide about 2.7 million people with improved energy access. The loan type, Laura, if you can move to the next slide, please. The loan type will vary from the type of the company we are dealing with. It can be a cash distributor, it can be a pay-as-you-go or rent-to-own or rent-to-ease. It can be a mini-grid, or also depends on the stage they are in. If, for example, let's say you're a distributor and you've operated for 2 years, you would be a good candidate for an inventory loan. Well, if you're a pay-as-you-go and you've operated for a couple of years or more, then you'd be a good candidate for receivables financing that is structured. If you're a mini-grid operator, would grant you a construction finance loan. Now, that was basically an introductory phase. And I'll move on to the next bit, which is basically to look at into much just about how we finance solar companies. I'll start off with the loan process, and will be followed by what we look for, then conclude with looking at the pitfalls we've seen. Before I go on to our loan process, I would like us to look at the off-grid solar industry value chain. Apologies, I know for some of you this is not new, but I thought it would be helpful for us to go through this, because like most manufactured goods that are imported, solar products have a long value chain, which requires financing at every stage. And by value chain, we mean the activities that you engage in for you to be able to deliver a product to the market or a service. And typically in the off-grid sector, the timeline for a product from ordering to delivery to the final consumer will take about 5 to 6 months. And if you put in consumer credit, like the pay-as-you-go companies, then it takes a longer time for you to receive your cash once you invest. So all this, what it's showing is there is need for financing within the sector. If we'll move on then to the next sector area, which is basically looking at our loan process. One is we've identified the need for financing. And our loan process is usually divided into about 5 stages. We have the pre-diligence, which you'll see a lot of similarities with presentation in the Florence. We have a pre-approval, which we call it initial fit test, which is basically to check whether we should pursue further discussion with the company. The initial test leads to an approval for diligence. We have a small committee we've set up for that. And after that is followed by full diligence, which is basically digging deep into your company, its financials, and whether we see it as a reason for us to invest in it. We then present it to a credit committee for approval. And thereafter, we move to the fourth step, which is basically the signing of the loan agreement. And in case there is collateral or security to be registered at this stage, it is done. Then we move on to the disbursement. The whole process, after that, we have the post-disbursement monitoring. We usually require borrowers to provide information about their performance. We have monthly information, also quarterly. So once you get onto our portfolio, you need to be able to provide that information. The whole process usually takes from about 1 month, but that depends on how fast the borrower is in providing information. We've, however, incorporated some flexible structures, built-in internal processes to help us speed the disbursement, especially for the subsequent loans from the initial loan. The whole diligence process is quite comprehensive, and that's why we put in competencies within ourselves or flexibilities for any additional or follow-on loans to take a shorter period, which can be reduced to up to 2 weeks, as long as we have the reporting requirements up to date. Now, if we go back to look into the initial fit test, what it entails looking at such factors as, of course, a legally registered business. It's in a geography where we can legally lend. You need to be distributing solar products. Our focus is on solar. You need to show that you can grow, and that means you need to see what you've done and what you are doing. Like, is there a market for that product that you're distributing or service? And you need to have, of course, the management team in place that is sound, and are you able to provide the diligence information? So we dig into all those factors. Mostly we probably initially have a call and then follow up with a visit to your office or to one of your customers, and then share with you a document. We call it a customer intro for you to fill in a lot of questions. It's a one-page document. Then we can present that to we call it a deals committee for approval to proceed to diligence. Now, once we have confirmed that you fit within our profile, and we've received the initial approval for diligence, then we proceed to full diligence. Under the full diligence, it's digging deep into the business, and we've identified or classified 4 major areas which we look at when it comes to the businesses we finance. One of them is the business model, and I'll start off with just mentioning the factors we look at, and then we'll look into much details of each later. The number one thing we look at is the business model, and as many of you, it's basically how the business makes money. How do you generate your revenue to arrive at your profit? The second thing we look at is your capital structure. That is, how have you financed your business? That is, what are the long-term sources of financing for the business, and who has a stake in your business? The third thing we look at is the track record. So we are looking at what have you done, what have you achieved, and therefore showing that whatever you're saying you'll do, you'll be capable of doing that. So we'll look at the competencies around all that. The fourth and last area we look at is on your team and management. How capable are they to support the company to grow further or to do whatever you're saying you're going to be doing. If I may go further into details about the 4 areas, and starting off with the business model. The business model, as we have said earlier, shows how the business makes money, and generally shows how you generate your revenue and profits, and it explains who your customer is, how you're reaching that customer, which need you're reaching. There is market for that, there's demand for that need you're satisfying, and it also involves looking at your financial model. That is, how is all that translating into money? What is the financial performance that you're projecting, or that you expect? We also look at all the partners you're involved with and the channels you use to reach your customers. For example, maybe you're distributing your solar products through partner MFIs, or you're using the social groups. For those who know about Kenya, they're called chamas. So we look at all that, your distribution, how you distribute your products, and just looking at all the areas you work at, how you arrive at your revenue. Um, Therefore, the business model will show us how you generate your sales and revenue, how you make your profit, your sales and distribution and marketing activities you undertake. If, like, let's say you're a pay-as-you-go or lease-to-own or company, we'll be looking at your credit assessment. How do you appraise or how do you qualify your customers for them to be able to buy your products on credit? This is, of course, very critical for such companies. We'll also be looking at, for example, something like data security, which has become important. We'll be looking at the technology you're distributing, the products that you're distributing. Have they been used somewhere else? What is your after-sales service? As you know, it's not just about distributing the solar products, but there's also the service component of it. So your after-sales service and your customer service is very important. We would want to understand that because we want to invest or lend to a business which we know will be able to generate its money and repairs. We'll also be looking at how the growth you project, and of course that will be against what you've done in the past. And the key point, of course, is to knowing the business as a whole, and getting to know how you run your business and how you arrive at your money. The second area you look at is capital structure, which is basically how you finance your overall operations and growth, and by the various sources of funds. It will show the proportion of long-term debt and equity that your company has been able to raise or has been able to raise to finance its operation. The various forms of debt and equity will present different levels of risk in investing in the business. On one end, we have the secured debt, senior secured, and then on the far end, we have the common equity. And each, of course, represents various different levels of priority when it comes to, for example, liquidation. And the reason why we're interested in this is because we want to know our position as a lender in your business, and whether you have sufficient money to support your business. We are also interested in knowing the people or the institutions that have a stake in your business. Now, most people will opt for a blend of both equity and debt to meet their needs for their expansion. Of course, the two forms of financing can work well to reduce the downsides of each. However, the right ratio will vary depending on the type of business you are in, your cash flow, your profits, and the amount of money you need to expand your business. The key point here is to understand what are your long-term sources of financing for the business. So those are the two areas we look at. The third one is track record. And the track record, basically, we are looking at, we want to understand what have you done and what are you going to do. Has your business shown growth over the period within which you have operated? Therefore, we call it a proven business model. That is, you're distributing technology that is proven, that is, it's been used in the market, your product has been used in the market. There is potential for growth, that is, you can be able to grow your sales and your team and the size of your company in terms of your market, and you have the internal capacity to exploit that potential. In track record, we'll also look at specifics, like, for example, if you're a pay-as-you-go company, we'll be looking at the quality of your portfolio. That is, the customers who are on credit, how are they performing? How are they paying? How many are late, and how long does it take for you to collect? How many have totally failed to pay? And therefore, what has happened to those? If you're a manufacturer, there will be different factors we look at, for example, the units that you sold. If you're, for example, a solar engineering and construction company, we'll be looking at the size of projects that you've installed and how they have performed. So, of course, in that, when it comes to track record, sometimes we'll talk to your customers just to be able to understand their experience. So that's what we look at in track record. And the last bit, the fourth area we look at is on the governance. And this is basically the team and management. We hope to see a qualified team that is sufficient to be able to take the company forward. And ideally, we would expect to see separation of ownership and management. So we'll be looking at if you have a team here, like let's say you're operating from Nairobi, how many people, and you're distributing your solar products, depending on how you're distributing your products. For example, are you using your own distribution points, or are you using your, what do you call them, MFI partners or other partners to distribute your products? Then we'd want to understand what capabilities are there for you to be able to push your products forward in terms of your team and management. Once we've analyzed the four areas, we are able to understand the risks in the business and whether we want to proceed or not, or whether we should give the company some time. So we always look for ways to work with the borrower while allowing them time to address these areas that are not to our satisfaction. Sometimes we have what we call milestones or conditions subsequent. Milestones are, for example, let's say you do not have a good, you're saying you're going to hire an accountant or you're going to implement a better accounting system. Then we can agree, like, for example, you're going to implement that within the next quarter, by the end of the next quarter. So we always look for flexibilities to be able to work with these early companies and smaller companies, because we know at being able to address all those four areas at once maybe is challenging. This point takes us to the next and final piece, which is the red flags of pitfalls we've come across. The biggest one is we've classified them into four. It's not exhaustive. However, those are the major areas we see as missing or being weak points for the companies that we've been able to come across. The first one and the biggest one is when the borrower is not able to provide financial information, or the financial information just presented is incomplete or unsatisfactory. And this usually will, because the company maybe does not have financial and accounting policies in place, or even an accountant. This leads us not to be able to understand your company's financial position, and therefore we are not able to present your case for financing and not able to lend. The second gap we see is on the team, particularly that of middle-level managers, that is the functional managers who are between the owners and the staff executing the job. This important group is essential to driving the business, and their absence, of course, leads to the owners probably taking up that role. And we know that the owners are the ones who are pursuing investors, they are writing the strategy of the business, among other senior roles. So we find probably you're dealing with an owner and he's still dealing with the equity investors, still the one to forward to you financial information. Therefore, they may take time, which really affects the quality of the information they'll be sending. The third one is poor response to us as debt providers. And this one usually arises from the first two. That is, if you don't have good financial and accounting systems or policies, and you don't have the right or sufficient team to be able to probably delegate some of the roles, then you'll take long to respond to us. If we require information, probably we are going through the diligence process, we ask for information and it takes a long time for us to get it. That one is not usually good, because it means that we are, it's the transaction, it becomes more expensive on both sides, of both the customer and us as a financer, because remember, the transaction is still alive on our end, and we are dedicating our man hours. We are probably made a provision for the funding within our, when you're raising our funds. And of course, now we face the risk of having the opportunity cost of that money. And even on your side, probably you're still thinking you'll be able to get that money, which may affect how you do your business if you don't get it. So those are the three areas. The fourth area and the last one is we see some of the companies not having a clear long-term strategy, especially that will be able to face the competition. Like, in the solar sector, some of these areas are quite uncharted, like you can be the first person to be doing something, but the rest are usually like following. So you need to have a good competitive structure, competitive strategy, or very good competitive advantage for you to be able to still emerge ahead of the competition that may be coming in the near future. That is all for me. Thank you for your attention. I will now hand over to Laura for the question session.
Thank you so much, Shalmith. That was very informative. I am going to launch one last poll at the same time as we collect questions for you. This question is more for the investors on the line. According to your opinion or experience, which of the following would you identify as the most important pitfall? So I've launched that poll for those of you who are on the line, and in the meanwhile, we'll be taking questions. I'm going to give a few more seconds for people to vote on this poll. All right, so it looks like it's very evenly distributed. The largest gap that participants have identified is gaps in the team. So what Shalmith was talking about of being too reliant on one individual or not having strong enough mid-level management. And we know also from our experience in the field that can be, at the earlier stages, a really tough one to tackle. Then the other three that get an equal number of votes are lack of financial information, timely response, and no clear long-term vision. And I think these are all also interconnected. Without a proper team in place, it will be difficult to be able to get financial information to an investor in a timely manner. Now let's see questions for Shalmith or for Sunfunder on the debt side. So we have one question here on whether we can get a list of investors on the call. So I think that's a general question of how do we find more investors? There's also another question here on what if it's still an idea and you don't know where the investors are? So Shalmith and also maybe Nico from Sunfunder, maybe you can talk about how you find the companies you invest in and how do you cross-refer with other investors in the sector? Shalmith, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. We find our customers through various means. One of them is sometimes, for example, when we go for conferences, we'll meet some of the solar companies. If you look at, that's one way where we meet some of those companies. We can have an initial contact at that point and then follow up that with further discussions later on when you probably go back to your respective areas. The other, we have, first of all, I need to state we have what we call a business development person. We have one dedicated to Africa, whose role is generally to get those businesses onto our desks for pursuing further. The other way in which we get these solar companies is through some of the manufacturers. Probably they may have somebody who needs financing and they may refer them to us. So referrals is another way. We may also have probably an equity investor who needs somebody to raise debt. Probably they've given the maximum they can and they also now need to have debt financing coming in. So sometimes you can have that referred. Those are basically some of the areas through which we get businesses, customers.
Thank you. This is also a question, well, both for Lauren and for Shalmith. During this presentation, overall in this sector, there's a lot of discussion about East and West Africa. So we have a question from the audience about what about Southern Africa? Do you see any investments happening there? Maybe Shelmith first and then Lauren.
I think Nico would probably have more information about South Africa, but what I can say is South Africa, especially not Southern Africa, but South Africa itself in terms of solar, I believe it's very huge. And it seems, in my best opinion, I think it seems to be very well served by, I think, ahead of the rest of Africa, in my belief. But however, we've seen some of the neighboring countries emerging in terms of solar, and we are looking at some of those. Nico, I don't know that you have something to add to that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Shelmith. Hi, everyone. Nico from Sunfunder here. Just briefly to add, we have completed transactions in the southern African region, and certainly building pipeline in South Africa as well as other countries in the region. So very open to hearing possibilities to do more work there.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what Shelma said. I think that the circumstances are different, and mobile money certainly isn't nearly as well developed. So if you're talking about pay-as-you-go, there are a few markets that would surpass sort of the top 5 that are mostly in East Africa and a couple more in West Africa. We definitely see more on the mini-grid side, so more village level kind of companies, particularly in Zambia, but that's and there's definitely folks working in Mozambique, but definitely not nearly as much activity as East or West Africa at this point.
The next question is for Sunfunder. Companies often hear advice for local currency funding to minimize currency risk. Sunfunder, you've just launched something specifically catering to local currency. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience and view on that.
We've just launched the local currency financing capability, when we are looking at some of our first deals under that. But basically, it's for facilities or loans that are from 500,000. The particular capability for local currency financing is arising out of our most recent fund. It was launched last year. It's called the Beyond the Grid Fund. It's supported by OPIC. So that's how we've been able to do that, through a partnership with MFX. So in terms of experience, we are going through some of our first transactions under that, and so the experience is still learning. However, we believe that we will not encounter any challenges.
Yeah, we have another question here on local currency as well, but I think that was answered there. I mean, it's clear that there is a need for local currency financing in the space overall, particularly with companies relying on receivables. And it's great that MFX, together with Sunfunder, that you're now able to work together to provide a solution for that for companies. The next question comes from actually outside of Africa, and can be to both Sunfunder and to Blue Haven. Is being a single founder a disadvantage? I'm from Pakistan and see a huge business potential in off-grid solar in the coming years, but it's difficult to find a well-qualified co-founder. What do you recommend?
I can take that one. This is a really hard, founding a company is really hard to do. Founding a company in energy is harder. And in Pakistan, it's not a market I'm familiar with, but I imagine it's even harder. Co-founders are, meant to also be thought partners for each other. And so we've never funded a single founder business. And I think it's a really tough road to hoe on your own, particularly in such a market. So I would say, get going. But to the extent, you can go to industry events, particularly in country, meet people that are interested. It's really hard to find a partner. It's something, I've tried to do on the investment side. So, yeah, I would recommend doing it if you can, but I know it's hard, but it'll probably be better for the business over the longer term.
Great. We are going to close the webinar now as we have run a little bit over time. I'd like to thank you all who are on the call for participating. We do have some more questions here, which I will provide to the presenters, and we can follow up if it's necessary or sort of relevant. Otherwise, we will be sharing the slides with you. So some of the questions that were asked, actually the answers are on the slides. But we do ask you to help us to help you by taking 2 minutes after we close the webinar to fill in the survey. That'll help us plan for future webinars and other events to help the sector even better. And then we'll be sharing the presentations after you fill in the evaluation. I'd also recommend you all who are not yet GOGLA members to look at the GOGLA website and sign up to our newsletter, where we share a lot of relevant funding opportunities and events from the sector for a broader network than just our members. And if you're an off-grid enterprise or investor on the call who hasn't joined GOGLA yet, please do look into GOGLA membership. Feel free to reach out to me or through our info@gogla.org email address to get more information. I hope to see many of you at GOGLA events in the coming year. And I'd like to thank again RECP, the Africa EU Renewable Energy Cooperation Program, for funding our work to provide the Academy. And I would like to thank again Blue Haven Initiative and Sunfunder for providing us with such excellent speakers and resources in the form of Lauren, Chelmith, and Nico. So thank you very much. I'm going to close the webinar now. Bye.